Hello, my friends. About to do guitars all day today. It's going to be interesting because we could go really, really crazy deep on any number of directions. So I'm going to get Matt Beckley on here and we'll just start chatting. But we're going to just try to answer questions about guitars, talk about guitars, and kind of see where we end up. It may be a two-parter. It may be that we go quickly through it. But I think there's so many different things to cover about guitars that I'm not exactly sure how the conversation is going to go. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Settling back into things and do the whole thing sideways. No, that'll be too confusing.
Guitar's confusing enough as it is.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I like the hat. I
Hey, the Detroit Rams.
That's
my
right.
boy Stafford getting a chip.
That's right. It's close enough, right? Close enough.
Yeah. And I've got the Rams. Wait, where are they? Blazers on.
Oh wow! Just fully repping,
fully supporting.
Repping. Yeah, that's great, man. So how are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm doing the number one thing you're not supposed to do, which is roll over your guitar cable with your studio chair, which happens all the time.
That's the first piece of advice on this first piece of advice on guitars is don't run over your fucking cable.
You'll go through a lot of fucking cables that way.
Absolutely. Well, so you and I have chatted for multiple hours about vocals and vocal production, and you are an accomplished and knowledgeable vocal producer. But of course, maybe even more than that, or equal to it, you are an accomplished guitar player, producer. You toured with Katy Perry. You come from a family of guitar player. As a guitar player, you not just as an inflatable shark or whatever else she was doing.
As an MD, actually.
Oh, as an MD, I did not realize that. So you are deep in studio guitars, amps. You come from a family of musical guitar people. Your father being a guitar player of some renown. So your knowledge is actually, I would venture to say, much deeper than mine in a lot of ways. I come from growing up playing in punk rock bands. In addition to producing hip hop, I played guitar in bands for a long time, and then I worked under Eric Valentine, who is such a guitar wizard that
he's the benchmark of guitar. I mean, him, Jerry Finn, and Doug McKean. If you want to know, Joe Barresi. If you want to know like the Mount Rushmore of guys that record guitars, I would say those are the guys to listen to.
Contemporary guitars. Those are the guys. So between us, we have a lot of experience and I think a decent amount of knowledge. That being said, guitar as an idea of a thing to talk about is so broad that I was thinking we sort of talk about it broadly a little bit and then get into more specifics, because we can talk about there's just so many ways to have a conversation about guitars. I think the people that end up watching these are a spectrum of record makers, from people who are a bit older and recording live bands and pretty deep on actually recording amps and with musicians that are sitting there playing their instruments, and then people that are bedroom producers who either don't really play guitar at all or just have a DI and are trying to figure out how to get cool sounds and are limited knowledge-wise. So maybe we just kind of start talking about guitar generally. I think you and I have talked about this, but perhaps not. It's interesting as I think two guys from the last generation where we came up when the guitar was the instrument that you picked up when you're a teenager when you wanted to make music. That is no longer the case. Right. If you are a teenager
or
today,
meet girls.
Meet girls. Yeah. I mean, to be a rock star, to play guitar was something that in our youth was like the thing. And now if you are starting to make music, I don't think you pick up a guitar first. You start making things on a laptop, because in order to play guitar, you have to spend a few weeks, if not more, with blisters on the ends of your fingers, and it takes a while to get something that sounds good. And you have to struggle through some stuff, whereas you can pick up GarageBand and Splice and start making loops that evening, which is amazing. And there's, we could talk about what's good about that, what's nostalgically a bummer about that, or whatever. But it is the case that guitar is not the primary driver of music in the way it was for us now. So the way people think about it has changed, and therefore there are different conversations to be had about what to do about guitar and where does it fit into music. I don't know that we need to go super deep into that, but I don't know if you have thoughts on that initially as someone who's worked across, when you work with Camila Cabello, it's different than working with Switchfoot or working with rock bands, and you've done all of those things. So I don't know if you have some thoughts about that.
It was interesting because when you asked me to do this, I was already thinking, I was like, I don't know how you're going to fit it in, because there's so much to talk about not just how to do it, but like why to do it. There's that great quote that the people that know how will always work for the people that know why. And I think that so much of it's not about like, how do you do it? But like what you were saying is, why do you do it? Like, where does it fit in with music? And I think if you approach it from that perspective, I think that the how becomes a bit easier to deal with. But I do think, and you would know this just as well as anybody, it seems to me that guitar is coming back, that the immediacy of something that you can play, you can't really play in GarageBand for your friend a song or for your girl a song in the same way that you can, sit around with an acoustic guitar and play Wonderwall. It's a different thing. And I think that I actually feel like, especially in the last year or two, that we're seeing a lot of that natural music. Like, not that laptop rock is unnatural. I think it's all important, but I think that kind of like organic, natural music, it seems to me, is making a comeback. Everyone's looking at real synths instead of soft synths. Everyone's looking at real guitars instead of, in fact, so much of my work is from pop producers and hip hop producers. Like, I'm the only guy in my crew that really plays. So like, I'm on a bunch of songs just because I'm the only dude in the room. You know what I mean?
Who has a guitar, who can play a sound, and
So, but I think we're seeing it more and more often, and what a guitar is good for. A guitar is an incredibly expressive instrument. You can chord on it, you can solo on it, you can bend on it, and all of those things give it a really organic vocal-like quality that I think is harder to achieve in just regular, MIDI programming and shit.
One of the things I'm noticing too, when I'm listening to records in the last few years that have guitar on it, they are necessarily imperfect. So much of how I learned about guitars with Eric Valentine when we're making Good Charlotte records or All American Rejects records or Taking Back Sunday is these bands, especially a band like Taking Back Sunday, is like pure excitement live, but also chaos. And if you recorded the live set exactly as it was, it would not sound like the records, because there's so much chaos and excitement in seeing it and being with the visuals, that the messiness of the playing is sort of irrelevant. And so we spent so much time, okay, how can we keep this exciting but make the precision of the playing and the moments, and especially as we're getting into contemporary records where everything is very programmed, how do you make things that are live sound as exciting as the program stuff? But now, these days, what's happening is a lot of the guitar is like, no, we want the messiness of the sound, because then we're going to go program drums. Those are going to mostly be on the grid, and the vocals are going to be tuned, because that's a part of contemporary music sound, the vast majority. So if you have tuned vocals and you have gridded drums and 808s, what's the organicness that you're going to get out of the guitar? So things are much messier than they used to be, which is cool, but I've had to adapt as a player.
Well, there's so much in there to unpack that deals with what I was going to talk about today. The first is that it's interesting because you need some perfection in your track and you need some organic. So if you're going to have like locked in guitar, you kind of want the drums to be loose. But if you're going to have gridded drums, then you kind of want the guitar to be loose. The irony is that some of the best guitar players in the world, I would argue that, and I've seen them all. I've played with Blake Mills, I've played with Phil X, I've played with all of these guys that are crazy guitar players. Dr. Luke might be the best guitar player on the planet. People forget that he was the SNL guitar player at 22 years old, or whatever. Yeah. He is ape shit good at guitar. Yeah. Andrew Watt. I was thinking of some of the stuff that Andrew Watt plays, is just a mind-bendingly brilliant guitar player. But all of the guitars on their tracks sound like they were done by a 15-year-old with their tongue hanging out the side of their mouth. It's not because they don't know how to do it. These guys are all just unbelievably locked-in, brilliant guitar players, but they're on purpose playing it loose. You know what I mean? Because that's the vibe. And again, it's the how versus the why. The why you're doing it is because you're trying to interject some vibe. It's not like a Howard Benson record where you play a guitar chord, chop it up, and then lock it on the grid. So everything's like perfect. you're trying to get the human aspect of it, and you're kind of playing sloppy because of that. But you said something else about the Taking Back Sunday thing, which I think is really important and something I thought of before this, is that there's 3 types of guitar players, and it's not better or worse, but it's different, and people need to appreciate and understand the differences, or it's going to be hard for them to record. There's live guitar playing, there's Instagram guitar playing. Actually, there's 4. There's playing in your bedroom, and there's playing guitar on records. And those 4 things require entirely different things to be successful. When you're playing live and you're playing Taking Back Sunday, part of what makes them awesome, and I've seen them live and it was just unbelievable, is the sheer volume that whoops your ass when the guy plays something and you have not only, you know, just an orange stack or whatever just ripping your head off, but it's coming through thousands and thousands of watts of PA, right? You're just moving so much air.
Yeah.
When you're listening to it on a set of studio monitors, your headphones or whatever, you don't have that visceral, quite physical feeling of getting punched by that much air moving. And so it's how do you create the excitement that you feel? Again, it's not the exact tone. It's how do you create the excitement that you feel through a little set of speakers or headphones or through your phone or whatever that you would get from a concert. And that's why if you get your guitar sounding right in your room, when you put on a mic on it, when it comes through the speakers, will never sound exactly like it sounds in the room. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just something that you have to plan for accordingly. You know, a SM57 up against a 12-inch speaker, when you hear it back through your Yamaha HS5s or whatever, isn't going to sound the same as it does in the room. Not good or bad, but you just have to plan differently. Because if you're only, which is why I think there's something to be said for modelers. Like, I'm really lucky. So like in my studio, I actually have a booth right there that I have a bunch of amp heads, and they're all plugged in, and they all go through a switcher to a speaker cabinet in the booth.
Wait, so I think let's plan this out a little bit. I think I was going to save the let's go technical toward the end of it, but let's go into it right now. What is your setup in your studio? And then maybe I'll sort of stop you in between and break down some whys. But let's just go through it, because your setup is elaborate. And by the way, I've said this to other people in DMs and things. When I have a question about guitar pedals, or I did a bunch on this most recent James Arthur album. There's a few more songs coming out.
Oh, and I'm so jealous that you worked with him, man. That's he's awesome.
Yeah, and it was a lot of guitar-based stuff. And so I talked to you because I was at the house in Malibu trying to figure out how do I get big. Because one of his references was a Taking Back Sunday album that I worked on, just coincidentally, which was a great way to get a gig. And he's like, here's what I'm looking for. I was like, I recorded those guitars. But those guitars were recorded at Eric Valentine's studio with his brain and his setups, and really, really credit to him on those records, of course. But how do I get those now? I'm at this house in Malibu. I don't have multiple rooms. Can I do it with amp simulators? Should I get a Kemper? Are there IR stuff I should do? All that. So I always call you for pedals, for advice, as you are the most knowledgeable guy that I know. So maybe you can go through your setup a little bit, and we can talk a bit of the why as well.
Well, it depends on what so we're talking about recording a record, which is different than how I would approach it live.
Yeah.
I'm really lucky. So I can really quick, like I said, my thing, if you look over there, and my thing's a mess because I've been doing it. I have a bunch of amp heads. You'd mentioned that one. That's the one that we did all the Switchfoot record on. Dare You to Move and all of that stuff was recorded through that amp head.
Okay, what is that amp head?
That's a VHT Pitbull 50 ST, which is an amp that they only made for and it was just an amp that I bought in college because I was like, this sounds good, and it was used. And it turns out they, like all things, they didn't make them for very long, and they're impossible to get, and blah, blah, blah. In fact, I think I'm about to retire it because it just doesn't have the thing anymore, and I've had it gone over 2 or 3 times, and it's lost whatever it had,
Interesting.
But on top right there is an amp switching system. So basically all these amps are plugged into that, and then they get piped into my booth in there, which is a double pane glass, blah, 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 into a couple of different cabinets that are mic'd up with a couple of different microphones, depending on the vibe that I'm trying to get. I've got all of that shit. Having said that, 9 times out of 10, when I'm recording guitars at my place, I'm recording through a Strymon Iridium, which is a little direct amp simulator box, and using pedals. Because again, when you're EQing a guitar for a record or you're trying to play to a record, I'm of the belief when you're writing the song, you should be inspired by the amplifier and the feeling of that. But when you're recording a record, you need to be listening to the guitar through the monitors and through the speakers, because like through your monitoring speakers, not your guitar speakers, because that is the sound that the audience hears. Nobody cares how it sounded in the room, like the live room where it was mic'd up. All the listener gets is what they get through the speakers. So, and to make that awesome, you oftentimes have to do really drastic things that, quite frankly, kind of make it sound shitty live in the room, like through the guitar cabinet. But you know that you're tweaking it so that when it comes out of your headphones or your speakers, it sounds better. And so I think a lot of times too many people put too much emphasis on what the guitar is sounding like coming out of the guitar cabinet, and not enough emphasis on what it sounds like coming out of the guitar speakers. And so what was interesting about what you were doing with James Arthur, like we talked about a lot of different guitar pedals, ways to get that guitar amp sound, but in a way that you could monitor it so you actually were hearing what was going to tape versus being overwhelmed with what's in the room. Because even if you're wearing headphones and you have a small Pro Junior or a Fender Hot Rod or a Fender Deluxe or a small amp that you would have, and you'd have the amp in the room mic'd up, that amp is kicking the shit out of your headphones and or your studio monitors. So you're not getting a really true sense of what you're recording until you stop playing and you listen back, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that where a lot of people go wrong is they'll get a kick-ass sound while they're recording, but they don't realize how much of that's being influenced by the amp live in the room. And then you end up with an anemic guitar sound on tape because you were getting, like we said, the Taking Back Sunday Live, you're getting all that volume, you're getting all that moving air, and you're getting all the excitement that comes from that, but that's not being put onto tape. Yeah. So I think it's important to really be listening, if you're recording guitars, what's coming through to tape versus what it sounds like in the room, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And it's, it's a little bit nostalgically disheartening to think that the best way to get great guitar sounds now it's been the case for me for a long time, though. I can't remember the last time I recorded an amp because I wanted the like authentic sound of an amp. It's just not super convenient to even to like get the amp and try the different mics and get a room mic and get the phase right and mess with the EQ and and get all that happening for me. And even for you who has the setup, everything's dialed in. You said 9 out of 10 times you're not even using the amps and the mics that are set up and dialed in. You're using the Strymon pedal and pedals going in. That's very interesting. It's a little disheartening, but it's what it is.
Having said that, we're moving to now. So, ow, my foot, dropping names. My buddy James Valentine gave me this SIR thing. And what this SIR thing is it's a reactive load. And so a guitar amplifier needs a speaker cabinet. If you try to run it without one, it'll basically blow up, a good tube amp.
Yep.
That thing, basically you put that after the guitar amplifier and it soaks up all the power. And then you could run a line directly into your computer or directly into another thing that would do what's called impulse response loading, which basically simulates a cabinet. Just the last couple of days, I've been re-bringing that into my setup. I've been going through a bunch of different IRs, and I've been honestly having a lot of fun cranking my old amps and getting that sound because they're frankly just better, it's still better. But at the end of the day, a 10 out of 10 guitar sound isn't worth it if it took you 3 hours to achieve, where if a 9 out of 10 guitar sound you can get instantly and you capture the vibe of the performance in the recording, that's going to win over the slightly better guitar sound every day of the week, if that makes sense.
Thinking about the pacing of the way records are made now, there's an interesting thing that happened. I'm telling other people's stories, but I remember talking to Eric Valentine. He did 2 albums with Slash. Slash did 2 solo albums sometime in the last 10 or 15 years. And Slash, I believe, said, I want to do the first one. I want to do this all old school style, like we used to make records with tape machines and all of that. And so they did it all with tape machines, at least initially. I'm not sure if they finished it all with tape machines, but the process of actually recording onto tape, taking the time to like cut takes together and physically cut tape, Slash and everybody else involved was just so used to being able to pick takes in Pro Tools and move things around that it was just too slow, even for someone who deliberately said, this is how we used to make records. This is how we did Guns N' Roses. I want to make it old school. People are just used to a different pace now. So to take the time to, like, we have one guitar sound, now let's find the next guitar sound for the next part of the song, to spend even like a half an hour, which is, it would always take way more than that to find a guitar sound back when we were making some of those records. But to take even 20 minutes or half an hour to like get another guitar sound is just insane. It's just not, I mean, some people may
lose the spark,
but very much so. And so when I'm making records now, it's like, I've got the 3 of the Neural DSP plugins. I've got a couple of pedals that you've recommended. We'll talk about some pedals. I've got a few other presets I like on Amplitude and Guitar Rig, and I just can cycle through them really quickly and get ideas out. And if you're making records in a contemporary space, by and large, the pace of it is going to be more important than the perfection and nuance and almost sound design of an individual guitar sound.
Well, there's a couple of things there. Again, all sorts of things to unpack.
Yeah.
Have we had the conversation that I had with Jeff Emmerich about recording the tape? Have I told you this?
No, but I like that name drop. That's my shit.
So Jeff did like about 10 records with my old man. Jeff and George Martin did about 10 records. So we got to know those guys.
I know that it's annoying, but we have to say who Jeff Emmerich is, the late great Jeff Emmerich, who was the 19-year-old engineer at Abbey Road way back in the day, did Beatles records through multiple generations. He invented things that we now use. I don't know if he literally invented tape echo, but things like that back when recording technology,
flanging.
Yeah, back when recording technology went beyond you put a mic in front of an orchestra and it went to, you have 4 tracks, you have multiple options, you can bounce things, you can mix and bounce and do generations of tape. He was the architect, along with George Martin, for all those Beatles records, when the birth of all the things we think of as engineering or production, a lot of those tools. So anyway, Jeff Emmerich, total legend. Everybody should read his book.
Yeah, he was a G. But so when we were doing that Switchfoot record, one of the things that always stuck with me was they were going to do all the drums on tape, and because tape sounds better, blah blah blah. It was John Fields producing, who's a brilliant producer and engineer as well. He gets unbelievable sounds. But yeah, we go in, we do a pass where the drums are multed out to Pro Tools and to tape, and everyone's like, "Oh, the tape is so much better, warmer, transient response." We all go out to lunch. We come back, and the engineer, we blind test the A, B. Do we like this one better or this one better, this one better or this one better? To a man, everybody picked the Pro Tools over the tape. Now, years later, that always stuck out with me that, oh, maybe a 192 sounds better than tape. I had done a record for a band called Low, and they come out in Sub Pop, and Sub Pop only does vinyl, right? They do vinyl or they do digital releases. I had to remix the record for vinyl because the low end was skipping the needle.
Yep.
And we actually had to make the record kind of not as high fidelity, so it worked on vinyl. Basically, analog was limiting in this sense. Furthermore, a couple years later, Jeff was over for dinner, and I remember kind of getting up the nerve to ask him what he liked more, like tape or Pro Tools, and what's the biggest difference. And he thought about it for a second. He said something that changed how I recorded for forever. He goes, when you did tape, the band had to rehearse for about a month beforehand because tape was expensive, and everybody came in really pre-produced, really knowing their parts. Then, when they do their take almost all the way through. Then, if you have to do another take, it takes about 3 or 4 minutes for the tape to rewind before you can do it. And you have to have that time to contemplate your sins. You can't just Apple Z and start over again and go.
Just run it back, click,
run it back.
Yeah.
And what happens is if you've ever done like a step and repeat, like a red carpet thing, or like someone takes your photo for too long, your smile kind of becomes, and it gets weird and unnatural. And I feel the same thing happens with your playing when you do take after take after take after take. You start kind of trying to get it right, but you start missing all of the feel that makes it take magic. You know, I know a lot of guitar players that can play a lot of notes, but they just have no feel and they have no soul. And it's the soul that people connect with. And so his whole thing was that tape sounds better because of the process of recording it. And it changed how I used to do that with vocals. I used to do that with guitars of like Apple Z to another take, Apple Z, like take. And I found that a couple of takes, quick break, talk to somebody for a minute or two, then do it again, got me far better results in far less takes than doing 100 takes of it all at once. So in terms of recording, of going to tape. The other thing is that, I don't know if you know, but on the Guns N' Roses record, which is something else I want to talk about, they were doing, and a lot of those big records, they had all the amps in the live room. So when they were in the studio, the control room, they're making sonic decisions based on what's coming through the monitors, not what's coming out of the amps. Yeah. So it's easier to use a live amp because you're adjusting for what's coming through monitors. But Slash had a volume pedal and a little shitty combo amp right next to him in the studio. And what he would do is, when he needed, part of the magic that comes from playing loud is the interaction of the speaker of the guitar cabinet with the guitar you're playing. And what Slash would do was, when he needed feedback or a bit more vibe, they would push down the volume pedal and run signal into the combo amp in the control room, so that there was an amp that the guitar could respond off of. And that gave him a bit more sustain and a bit more feedback and shit. And that's a really important thing that I wanted to get to, that people miss when they do modelers. Because if you're not recording guitars loud, you're not getting the interaction of the guitar with the amplifier and the speaker, which is why everybody in the 50s and 60s played hollow bodies, and they had to move to solid bodies because the solid bodies would not feed back as bad under volume. But now that we're in the recording studio and we don't have the volume, I find that guitars like 330s and Falcons and Gretches, 335s, they record a lot better because it's easier to get that interplay with a hollow body guitar and less volume coming out of the speakers. And so
because the guitars actually, the guitars are resonant pieces of wood. If they have holes in them, if they're hollow, they will resonate more, because as everybody probably knows, a pickup is essentially a version of a microphone. You put that next to a speaker, you're going to get some feedback interaction the louder it is. That's interesting. Yeah, that's something that I have found it difficult to get that cool feedback sound out of the guitar amp modelers, and I end up trying to crank my studio monitors to make that happen.
But that's also the far end of that particular bell curve is actual feedback. It's not just feedback. It's just how a guitar responds and plays, and how notes bloom and stuff like that is a lot different if there's not that interaction. You know what I mean? So it's not just about getting a squealing Motley Crue feedback. There's something that happens, and that I've found I've gotten much better results in my studio. I had Fender send me a Falcon, which is a big hollow body guitar that feeds back constantly, but it doesn't sound like that. It sounds as like I'm playing a Strat, but in front of a Marshall, if that makes sense.
That's very interesting. And this is going to make me buy a hollow body, because right now, my setup is, I sort of have I wouldn't say one of each, because there's so many ways to break things down, but I have, you can see back there, those are just a few things I have. I have a vintage P bass, and I have a modern jazz bass. I got a Eric Johnson Strat. There's
best Strat they make.
This is the best Strat. It's the great. Yeah, anybody wants to get a Strat, don't even worry about a vintage one. Nothing. It's just the Eric Johnson Strat's by far the best. Yeah. To me, it's the best artist model guitar, because he just spent so much time trying to make it, figuring out the winds on the pickups and everything. It's so good. It's
really good.
It's the best, just Strat sound. It's the best one. And I have the super expensive, when I was in the 9th grade, I saved my money for a year or two to get the Les Paul Studio. Sounds great. I've got a silver tone with the DeArmond pickups. And then for my acoustics, I have I guess it's a J45, a 60s Gibson that's great. And then I have a nice old Japanese nylon string. But the thing that I don't have is a hollow body. And it seems like I need one now.
Do you want me to change your life on the acoustic tip, by the way?
Yeah, please.
Also, Zach Higgins, Strat Plus from the early 90s, is incredibly underrated, and I desperately want the Strat Plus Ultra, and I've been on Reverb. Please don't outbid me for one. But he's absolutely right about that. I love those. This guitar, I went on a big, are you a Damon Albarn fan at all? Gorillaz,
yeah,
Blur?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Huge Damon Albarn fan.
Gorillaz more than Blur, but yes.
Go back and listen to, it took me a while to get into the Blur shit, and I'm that's really good.
It was never a part of my, I was a West Coast hip hop 90s punk rock kid, so I knew Wonderwall and a few Oasis songs, but I didn't really know Blur other than song 2.
I'll make you a playlist. It's like oh shoot, it's really good. But I saw him playing one of these, and I was like, I think I have. I've been playing Taylors since I was, and I've played Gibsons too. I have far more acoustic guitars than I should ever need. But Taylor makes a guitar called a GS Mini. It's a couple $100 at Guitar Center. It's kind of 3/4 sized. This is the single best writing, playing, recording, anything guitar I've ever played. I've bought 3 of them, so I can keep one in the studio and keep one in the house. And
wow,
they're unbelievable. So you don't need a great J160 or J45, which I have, and I have a J160, and I have all the kind of crazy things, and I have like 5 or 6 Taylors. This thing records and just also write on and everything like that. And if they break, every one you get from the factory sounds just as good. It's absolutely awesome. And, you know, you can, my go-to is the Eric Clapton neck with the Eric Johnson body. That's interesting.
Huh.
The GS Mini, yep. It's insane for its size. It is. It has more bass than guitars. I might when's your birthday?
Taylor GS Mini.
One. Taylor GS Mini. Yeah.
My birthday's not till October, so give it to me for my half birthday.
All right, we'll figure it out. But if you need to solve all your studio problems, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I'm just trying to answer some things that I'm seeing here. The Epiphone 335, Epiphone especially recently has been making incredible things. And if you don't have the money for a 335, I can't recommend it enough. And quite frankly, even if you have the money for a 330, which is the fully hollow, a 335 has a center block because they were trying to stop feedback. So they put a block down the middle. 330s are totally hollow. The Epiphone Casino is the Beatle guitar, and the 330 is the Gibson version of that. Normally I lean towards the Gibson versions, but the Epiphone Casino, I've played some that are better than the Gibson.
These are new ones because back in the day, Epiphone was a separate company. So a 60s Epiphone is basically a Gibson, just different. Yeah. But the new one forever, Epiphone was the cheap. It was the Squire. The Squire for Squire's to Fender as Epiphone is to Gibson. But some of the newer Epiphone Casinos are pretty nice.
They're really good. I haven't played much of the D'Angelicos, but people that I know that I respect actually really enjoy them. But I don't have enough time on them to make an educated thing. But they seem good. But also like that thing where everyone's like, oh, this is a much better Vox AC30, like blah blah blah, or it's just like a Vox AC30. I'm like, well, just get a Vox AC30. Yeah, like if that's the thing that you want, like. All right.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I feel like there's just so many ways to talk about all this stuff. Maybe we could talk a little bit about acoustics and miking. There was a great thread on the Discord, as always, promoting the Discord, because there's just so much knowledge on there. Kian, who's obviously an amazing engineer, worked under Eric after me, has done lots of incredible records, was giving advice. Someone asked about how to record a vocal and acoustic guitar together, and he talked about that classic technique of using two mics in figure eight. So you have
the figure eight
in certain directions. People can Google that or just go on the Discord and check that out. My general thought especially for bedroom producers and things like that, if you can for recording acoustic guitars, find a non-bright vocal mic. And my recommendation, is something like a Coles or a tube mic or something like that, where you don't have that high mid brightness that's kind of built into lots of modern mics. I mean, we talk about this a lot with John, with other people, that like if you can get mics that don't have that modern hyped thing in the upper mids for vocals, that helps, but especially for instruments, for percussion, for acoustic instruments, getting away from things that just like automatically add that 5 to 8K. So you have the flexibility. My favorite mics for acoustic guitars are either, I use my vintage 87 a lot. But I love the Coles, is probably my favorite just because it's so EQable. What's that there?
That's a Microtech Gefell M930. Which to me, the new 87s are trash. The old 87s are brilliant.
New 87s I don't like.
Microtech Gefell is the original Neumann company. Neumanns are built by Sennheiser now. The original factory in Germany, apparently, that split up was because it used to be Neumann Gefell was the name.
Right.
This company, Microtech Gefell, to me makes the most old school Neumann sounding mics, even though they're new. Their M930 is, I think, under $1,000, and to me, it's the closest in terms of purpose. Like anything I'd use a vintage 87 on, I would use this on. We all call it the noisy cricket. It's been handed around. All of the producers, you and I know, because like somebody doesn't have their 251 or their 87. They're like, hey, can I borrow the cricket? Because of Men in Black, because it's like
Men in Black,
little
the teeny one, it explodes everything.
Kicks ass. Yeah. Because it's zero noise. It runs off of phantom power. It doesn't have any self noise. It just it sounds whatever you put in front of it. But it basically, like you said, with an 87. For all the people wondering, when I asked my dad, because my dad's band was an acoustic guitar band, I was like, how did you get those sounds one day? How did, Ken Scott or Jeff Emmerich get those things? And he'd be like, okay, so you take an 87? I'm like, yeah. Like writing it down. And he's like, you point it at the guitar. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, and then you play it. And I'm like, okay, cool. And that's the thought that went into it, But I think that almost far more important, all those things that you said are important. One, again, we come back to the why. In a pop record, 9 times out of 10, an acoustic guitar is a melodic shaker. You're really using it for a rhythmic sense versus with maybe a little bit of melody, but it's just you're putting it in the same place you're putting a tambourine. It's just giving you definition and movement. So you don't want as much body as you think you do, like a bedroom player, like we were talking about, the difference in terms of what you need to be satisfied. So I would argue, especially on pop records, I use this a lot, but I also use Josephson C42s, which are their Josephson's small diaphragm. They're kind of like an 80 K84, KN84, whatever.
84, 184, those two. Yeah.
I would argue that placement and where you put it and the incredible difference that you can literally get just by moving your body this way or this way has so much to do with the EQ. Something like a Coles 4038, which I love, one of my favorite mics, because it's figure 8. It's part of why I think Royers sound so good in front of guitar cabinets, because they're figure 8s, is you're picking up a lot of the room because you're also getting all the input from behind the mic.
Yeah, you get, so as if people don't know, figure 8 picks up, if the mic is facing this way, you're actually picking up equal here, and it's a very narrow pattern, but you're getting on this side of the mic and this side of the mic simultaneously.
And so I think that lends a sense of space that to us is euphonic, is like pleasing to the ear, because it sounds like what it sounds like while we're playing it, if that makes, you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Which again, it depends. Like if I'm playing Blackbird all by myself, I want a large diaphragm mic, or something like a Coles 4038 that's going to pick up a lot of the room, that's going to pick up a lot of the bass. I'm going to want something like a J160 or a J45, a deader, something with a lot more low end, because that acoustic has to fill up the entire track. But in the background of like a Def Leppard track or something like that, that acoustic, again, we are boosting all the highs and we are low shelving at like 600. You know what I mean? Like well, so let's talk just about a shaker.
Yes. You know? Yes, and the why, as you said, is a great way to put it. That when people talk about, especially acoustic guitars, what kind of acoustic guitar is it? How is it fitting into this track? I find myself doing lots and lots and lots of shelving EQ on almost every acoustic guitar, because sometimes I want that extended high end, because like you said, it's a percussive thing. There's a song I'm working on now where I wanted to listen to, I was referencing Gives You Hell, the All-American Rejects, one of the last things I worked on with Eric, where there's acoustic guitar in that chorus along with like stereo bass, but the acoustic guitar acts like this compressed attack.
Can I ask you a quick question about that?
Yeah.
Somebody told me that those choruses are just bass. There's no guitar. Like that's all that is distorted bass, like Big Muff bass and stuff like that for Gives You Hell. Is there any truth to that?
I believe there's acoustic guitar, but there may not be electric guitar.
I feel like most of the
I don't know for sure, but that's, yeah.
It's kind of the Rage Against the Machine thing, where they actually have Tim, they have the bass up the middle, and then out of one side is Tim through a Big Muff on Rage Against the Machine, and he's handling the rhythm guitar, and using a fuzz pedal on the bass kind of brings it into that guitar world that you need. And I know there's acoustic guitar, but somebody told me there's actually no electric thing. But Doge to the moon, Blackington.
Yeah, Ryland. Shout out Ryland. Yeah.
By the way, if you want good sounds really quick and also an incredibly underrated guitar player, Ryland Blackington, who I've seen many, many times live, is doesn't get nearly the you could do a synth episode with him. You could do a whole week with him. He's out of control good.
Ryland, I'm gonna DM you.
Yeah.
On Gives You Hell, I believe it is. It's that the amp. I believe was an acoustic bass. That style of amp, like they're literally called acoustic. And these like giant stacks. So double track there with acoustic guitar. And then somebody said in the comments, I think Eric might have broken this down. So I think there's electric guitar in the last chorus. But what the effect that you get is you get all of the grit of distorted bass, but you get that percussive, compressed, transient, high-end stereo acoustic guitar. So there's times when I'm, like you said, lopping off all of the low end, so you get the percussive effect of the acoustic guitar. But then there's times when I'm lopping off all the high end because all you're getting is almost like a sampley sounding warmth of an acoustic guitar sound. You warble it out with like a
RC20.
RC20, RC Color, or the Uber Mod or something like that, where you're making it kind of warble and stand in the background like it's a sample. So the why of this is all really important. I mean, this is the interesting thing about having this conversation is we are trying to be mindful of both talking about how to get the pristine, best, whatever sound, but the way that guitars are used in records now, it's not guitar dominant music. So sometimes you want to capture like the best clean Strat sound or the best whatever, what's the best amp modeler. But then so much of how records are made is, okay, how can we now fuck this up? How can we make this interesting? How far back can you put the mic in the room? What does that sound like? That sort of thing.
I would argue, again, there's no finite things, but unless you were doing a Daft Punk, Niles Rodgers, hardtail Strat thing on like position 4, or you're doing a John Mayer record, those are the only times that I've ever heard somebody want like a real guitar. Yeah. Like even when I play guitar, like with Ammo or all these guys, they instantly, or if you're doing like, basically if you're not doing funk, like Strat funk, Ryland nailed it. You spend time to make things sound good, so you have the control to make them sound damaged. The 100%. First thing they do is go, okay, how am I going to fuck this up? And I'm like, God, I just like spent all this time and like I've spent decades learning how to play it perfectly, only to watch Ammo like literally chop it up and move it around and shit. Like, and I'm just like you know, but
the truth is, I mean, when you look at the notion of sampling, which I guess it obviously still happens in hip hop, but like when Frank Dukes was coming out and making all those samples that guys like Vinyls would then put beats over, he was making very deliberately old school performed, I don't know if it's lo-fi, but just sometimes lo-fi, sometimes just let's go for reverby, distant, warbled type of sounds. But when you're actually talking about sampling old records, those are actually amazing, amazing players. So it actually does make sense, like Ryland said on there, to figure out how to get the best, even if you're ultimately going to sample and fuck it up, when you make something that's really incredible performance-wise, that will still lead you to the best sounding thing that's going to be fucked up and sampled and chopped up.
I literally have a separate board that goes on the end of what I'm doing sometimes, depending on what I need, and all of these pedals, this is meant to sound like
let's go through them. What are they? What are the 3 pedals there?
Well, this is specifically what you're talking about right now, and unfortunately, they're kind of hard to get.
It's all right,
but this is meant to
flex on people.
This is called a generation loss, and its whole purpose is to make it sound like a VHS tape left in the sun, and it has like controls for noise and warble and shit falling apart. And then this is called a Wardenclyffe Deluxe by a company named Hungry Robot, and it kind of does the same thing but different. But it basically just fucks everything up. So you spend all this time getting a really pristine, beautiful sound with your Eric Johnson Strat and your 2-Rock and your boutique pedals, and then we run it through this, which is essentially throws it out of tune and band passes it, and it literally this is for Hiss the Snake, and this is for Crackle. I can't remember which this one does, but they're all basically just make everything shitty, and I have a separate board just to make shit that we spent at, like Ryland said, at Conway, or like my whirlies or whatever, or I'll take vocals and stuff like that. I'll run them out. I have a, if you're serious about recording guitars, I have something which I know Eric had called a PCP right here by Little Labs. And it basically allows you to plug a guitar into it and route it to different amplifiers or things, but also take a line signal out of Pro Tools or whatever your interface is, convert it back to guitar signal so you can run your vocals through a analog delay pedal or you know what I mean? Or basically the tracks. You can run your drums through a distortion pedal or something like that. It's called the PCP. It's made by a company, Little Labs. I know Radial makes something called the JD7 that sorry, Ryland is so funny that I've lost my train of fucking thought. Cliffs of Dover was the first song I ever learned on guitar, so it's appropriate. But and I still can't play it.
So what you're talking about is how to get the sounds out of the computer through pedals, so you can use a pedal board.
What I'm talking about is that if you in a studio and you're doing anything more than just plugging your guitar directly into your Apollo or your Focusrite, and using amp sims, and I know you like the Neural DSP ones. I actually still haven't. I heard the Brainworks one is really good. The Pete Thorne BX100 or whatever is supposed to be really brilliant too. But if you're doing anything with real signals or recording amps, that PCP by kids, if you want to be successful, a lot of PCP is really. The PCP is any problem. It's the guy who used to be the head engineer at Conway, and 10 years of trying to solve guitar problems in Conway made a box that any problem you could have with guitar, it fixes. It cuts out noise, like you can run cables through walls, like all these things that you can't do with guitar signal, you can do with one of those boxes, and they're brilliant.
Let's talk about pedals a bit, because I know that's something that I hit you up about when I made the decision. I'm going to use amp simulators. I went and tried a bunch of stuff. The Neural DSP ended up being my favorite. I know there's lots of other great stuff that people like out there, so it's not the be all end all. But I have the Nolly, Pliny, and Corey Wong, and that basically.
I was going to say, do you have the Corey Wong one?
It's great. I mean, built-in verbs, built-in compressors, and it's the part of my brain that's like engineer, analog, that sort of thing is like, I'm not sure. I don't quite have, but they're just super usable sounds, and they're customizable, and they're tweakable, and they're fucking great. But even the Pliny and Nolly, which are much more sort of heavy and. So this is the thing that is the most difficult for me, and it's back to a bit what we were talking about before, to not have an actual amp in front of me and have things that are getting the buffer down to like 32. There's still just a little bit of a delay on playing, and
it's fucking weird. It doesn't feel right,
and I don't know if there's a solution to that. I mean, truly.
Well, the solution is real amps and/or is getting it right on the front end. Because to me, once you've gone into the computer, that latency, and I found this recording vocals. So I have a Apogee Symphony, and they have something called Maestro, which allows you to monitor before it hits Pro Tools. So you basically beat the latency. And singers, just without that little bit of latency, even at 32 or 64 buffer coming in and out of Pro Tools, hearing themselves directly, all of a sudden started singing more in tune. And can't even hear the difference, but there's a feeling of the difference. And for me, my biggest thing right now against those things, and they're very useful and they will sound great, but part of what playing guitar is how and what that. Oh, you got me back?
Yeah, sorry. So you said the biggest thing for you right now
is how something makes you feel, because everyone talks about reamping. Oh, you can record direct and then reamp into all these different sounds later. But to me, I'm going to play the part differently if I'm playing into a Mesa Recto, or if I'm playing clean, or if I'm playing. How it sounds as a guitar player affects how you play. So a really good guitar player, it doesn't matter. But part of the reason why I'm such a fan of the Strymon Iridium, and a couple of people have brought it up again, is because it's instant. It happens before it gets to the computer. And so it feels a lot better. It also, the reason why I like the Iridium most is I play with a ton of guitar pedals, and the Iridium takes guitar pedals better. I found if I'm going direct and I try to put a big muff in front of a Marshall that's a simulation on the computer, it doesn't work like the same way as putting a big muff in front of a Marshall does in the real world. And that's, by the way, not to say it's bad, it's just different and it's not what I'm looking for. And it doesn't inspire me. Does that? So I don't want to shit on DSP things because there's a bunch of really good ones and there's guys that get unbelievable results with it. But that's why I think something like the Aux is so great. Sir makes an amp called the PT15, which has an IR loader built in. So basically it's a real tube amp, but that has a real legit direct out that you can go right into your computer with and not make any sound. To me, that seems like the answer, or a pedal like the, everyone's loving the Iridium. The Iridium changed my life too.
So when you're monitoring it, you are monitoring it in such a way that you're not getting a buffer through the DAW, and that's sort of the purpose.
Exactly. I listen direct, you know. It's not just the purpose. I also think it sounds better, but I play far better with that immediacy. It's like that thing. It feels like you're playing feel, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. We're having a little internet stuff. I don't know if that's on my end or your end, but I think I'm
right next to my crazy router, but you know, who knows?
Who knows? Well, we got a few minutes left. Maybe we talk. You said you use a ton of pedals. I always call you about pedals. Do you want to just maybe go through a few favorites, whether it's gain or distortion? I know you covered some of your favorite, like make the sound fucked up pedals. Are there delays you like, reverbs you like, just pedals? Let me since so much of what we're talking about is removing amps and going either direct or going through simulators. What's your pedal vibe? Okay, let's
well, I've just set up a new thing and we'll ruin all the secrets for everybody. Wait, did I just disappear? Oh no, here we go.
Yeah, you disappeared. That's how you keep it secret. Oh, there you go.
That's how I keep it secret. For whatever it's worth, but hopefully I'll say why and that'll help. I go into this J-Rock at Tim Pierce, or is it? Hello.
And what do they do?
That's a great, it is kind of like an amp in a box, but what I've found is I don't use a lot of gain on it. No matter what else I'm playing through, it makes everything feel and sound better. Tim Pierce, the guy who made it, is one of the most accomplished session guys on the planet. And it's clearly a pedal done by a guy who makes records because it just makes every amp behave better. And it also makes other pedals, it has a boost in it, and it like I can run this pedal, which is like a Marshall kind of grindy pedal, but if I put that Tim Pierce in front of it, it just gets cooler and tighter.
Is this sort of like a sonic enhancer? It's got some options for gain and things like that, but you don't end up using it. It's just got a little harmonic stuff, or what?
It's meant to be like an amp. It's meant to be like a nailer amp. It's technically meant to be like a distortion pedal, but I don't use it that way. It just sounds better low. This Unit 67 is a boost and a compressor. So it's basically an 1176 compressor in there, but it's also a treble booster, which if you like that kind of old school sound, a lot of it is a Marshall, which is actually a dark amp. They would have treble boosters, these things that would just like basically pump high end through them, and it kind of gives a good grind. I really like it, but I also run it clean a lot. It has a little bit of an EQ on it. You can see it has low, high, so you can kind of shape your sound. Again, I find when playing direct, a little bit of compression on the way in makes everything better, feel better.
Yeah, agreed.
This Archer is essentially a Klon. Everybody should have one. I don't use it with a lot of gain, but again, it's one of those pedals that you put it on and you're like, oh, it sounds like that. And everything sounds better. I don't know how else to describe it. Everything feels better. Everything's a little bit snappier and better. It's just better.
Yeah.
I'm going through a big Radiohead phase right now. And Tom York, who's an underrated guitar player, is always playing with a Rat. This is a boutique version of a Rat.
The Proco Rat's classic.
Classic. This is a one which is kind of like snazzier parts in it.
Distortion
they're incredible
pedal.
They're on bass. They're great on bass.
Yeah.
This is called a Nordland OD. I basically like 8 different flavors of overdrive, like kind of gentle overdrive going in. They all kind of shape different amps differently, and you kind of just there's spices. This is like a little paprika, this is a little garlic, this is a little chili pepper, you know, and you kind of blend your soup to taste for whatever you're trying
we're
to
nothing
do.
if not full of food analogies on these conversations, so this is perfect. So you'll rarely use a bunch of these together, or maybe one or two. You'll sort of try them out per what the part is, what the song is.
I use actually two or three of them almost always.
Okay.
Like I almost have the Tim Pierce one, this guy, on all the time. Then this is a Big Muff. It's just like a smaller one. Everybody needs a Big Muff. We do Smashing Pumpkins.
And so real quick, we're talking about this. These are in order as well. So you're getting this sort of like subtle gain, spice, get the sound to be a little more this or a little more that, a little brighter, a little more gain, a little more EQ, whatever, at the beginning of the chain before you start getting into higher gain and effects and things like that.
That's how I do it. And the other thing is I found, so something like this, which takes out a bit of the low end, or this, will tighten up a Big Muff afterwards. So
yeah, because those are big, sort of like squishy and fuzzy. You get a lot of I totally know what you mean.
Exactly. I have this space in here. Some guy's about to wire this up for me in a couple of days, so please forgive the nastiness of why it's all. This is just kind of proof of concept. This is the shit that I do. This is I always like to have just some nasty Jack White sounding fuzz pedal. This is called a sodomizer, just because I'm a child and think it's funny.
That is funny.
But this person, Debbie Ever, made great effects. This is an old one, and it's just fun. You hit it, and it just sounds really ugly and nasty, and sometimes you don't want your guitar to be pretty. There's a company called LPD out of Arizona that makes these pedals. They make the 87, which is like an 80s Marshall. They make the 74, which is like a 70s Marshall.
You told me about
make
these,
the 60. Yeah. They're hands down. My buddy Rod hit me to them. They're the best amp in a box pedals I've played, hands down, full stop. And they sound incredibly good. Like if I use that 87 and I boost it with the ODR, or I boost it with the Klon, they just sound and they feel incredible. And if you can only have one distortion pedal right now, that's the guy. What's the name of the company again? LPD. Lawrence Petros Designs, I believe. I'm sorry, Lawrence, if I'm butchering your name. This is a flanger, like an Electric Mistress. That's that kind of jet plane sound that's at the beginning of Lightning Crashes. I just listened to that song last week. That's so good. Doug McKean and Jerry Finn. But this one is a very good version of an Electric Mistress, which I'm a big Police fan.
Name the companies as you do these two, because I'm sure people will want to Google. We'll put them in the show notes. Well, this is a Retrosonic. And they just call it the flanger, but it's a copy of a company of something called Electric Mistress by Electro Harmonics. I use it as much as a chorus as I do a flanger. Chorus and flanger are actually very similar effects. And it is really fantastic. There's just no other way around it. It from there goes into a deluxe Memory Man. They just came out with this nano version. It's an analog delay. It sounds really, really good. And you can never have too much delay on your board. And all of those records that you love from the 80s and 70s, or the 80s, had Memory Man on them, and you can't beat it. Then there's yet another boost, something by Jackson Audio called the Bell Star, made by the guitar player of Switchfoot, Drew Shirley. If I could only have a second pedal, this would be it. So that guy with this guy, and I could probably get through any show you need me to get through. This pedal is kind of like a warmer, softer gain pedal, but it has a ton of versatility. And what I love about it is no matter where you set the knobs, you can't get a bad sound out of it. Like, it just sounds better. I have a Boss delay with a bunch of different modes in it, which is really great. What I love about this one is it has BPM, but also milliseconds. So if I'm with a producer and the song's in 107, you can switch it down into BPM and it'll, go down to whatever you need. And you can set it up exactly. This is a weird pedal. Everybody should have a weird pedal. It does pitch shifting delays and stuff gets weird. What's that called? But Red Panda Raster.
It's honestly, it's one of my favorite things. You can just sit around and play with it all day because like you hit one note and then all this weird shit happens and that I didn't mean to happen and it's better than I am. You know?
Well, one of the questions we got, which is a hard question to answer, is how do I make guitar loops? And part of it, like, you know, original guitar loops and having weird pedals and weird effects is a big part of that.
That's it. This is great for that because it does the loops, but it'll pitch shift. It's just very inspiring. This is a really great, this is by UA. It's called the Golden. It's just a great reverb. It's just your standard plate, hall, chamber reverb. And it's just, to me, the one that sounds the best.
Yeah.
This is the kind of shoegazer reverb, Walrus Slow. It doesn't do subtle. Every reverb is like 6-second tails and shit. And it's like bizarre and weird, but it's just good for ambient. I find myself doing a lot of ambient stuff.
Yeah.
And then, this is called an Eventide H9, which is basically a pedal of their rack mount unit. And it is just a problem solver. It does choruses, it does Leslie's. I have it right now for a Leslie. It does delays, it does boost, it does fuzz, it does distortion, it does everything. And basically, if I'm in a session and someone's like, do you have this? And I don't, I can dial it in on this and it'll get me through the day. And it sounds really good. That's the main pedal board, and that goes into the amplifiers. But I do a split out into this, which is a reverb pedal that if you play with mine, you're probably going to get Ammo bought one after he heard mine. Like everybody I know that plays this, it's kind of like the second they play it, they end up getting one.
What's it called there?
It's called a Specular Tempest. I guess it's big in the church community. Like I guess a lot of the church players have them. But I go out of this stereo. It stereoizes things through the reverb in a really beautiful way that I just haven't heard before in a plugin or anything else. And I come stereo out of that into the Strymon Iridium. So when I'm going mono, I'm usually using the amplifiers. When I want some stereo, when I want some space, I'm using the Strymon Iridium. Just because I can. It's easier. It's a lot harder to make a real amp stereo, whereas this is just kind of a easier way to get out the stereo.
Very interesting.
I feel like that's a lot. I feel like I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but I think that's
totally. Well, this is it's one of the things I want to do is kind of like cover a lot of bases today. Obviously, send me DMs, give me feedback. Let us know if there's more to chat about. I don't know how available you are for DMs, but if people have questions, they can hit up Matt as well. Obviously, very knowledgeable, much more so than I am on a lot of things. And I'll jump on the Discord after, but hit us and see if there's other stuff we can cover. If we want to do another hour on guitar, cover other things. Obviously, it would be cool to actually hear things, but almost all these pedals and all these things, you can go Google and YouTube and hear sound examples. But I thought it'd be cool to have you just run through your setup as well, which is great. I appreciate it.
And I love the second we start going to pedals, the viewership just starts creeping.
But the people who are watching it are like, oh shit, I got to take notes. And Bradley, Slowhand Sound on here takes the great show notes that goes up on the website. If he has questions, maybe he'll DM you as well. But all this stuff will be up on the show notes. Man, Matt, I love you. I appreciate you taking the time. As Anytime. Always, this is a blast, and I have to now go buy things, which is unfortunate.
That's the highlight of it.
I know.
But here, seriously, hit me up afterwards, and I'll tell you. If you literally, like a bunch of my friends now, that Specular Tempest thing, it just, the second you hear it, especially in stereo, like all of the Prophet guys, all of the mono synth guys now have them like one on top just to, because even if you're not using it like as a crazy Jeff Buckley reverb, it just, whatever it's doing, it is just the smoothest, most natural, pretty, it's awesome. It's just does something that's just like really great. Yeah.
Amazing, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and man, let's hang soon.
Anytime. Dude, good to see you.
All right, my brother. Thank you guys for all watching. Bye.